Hi, Zane. Welcome to the Buy, Grow, Sell podcast.
I appreciate you having me.
My pleasure indeed. For those listening, Zane's calling in from Florida. It's past 9 o'clock in the evening over there. So, Zane, appreciate you making time at such a late time.
It's my pleasure. I literally just put my 4 and 5-year-old to bed and was like, I need to get to that podcast.
Oh, well, that's cool. Listen, if the kids wake up and we hear some calling out for dad, I totally appreciate if you've got to go grab them.
I think I should be okay.
Cool. I know, Zane, strike me as a classic sort of entrepreneur. You're building, you're buying, you're growing, you're doing all these sort of cool things that, really relate ultimately to what we talk about on this podcast. But I know we're going to chat a little bit about one of your companies, which was National Insurance Consulting Group, that you founded and grew and ultimately sold to private equity. But maybe I could get you to kick off, though, a little bit, and just for our audience, give them a little bit of your background and kind of what led you to starting that company.
Yeah, happy to. So my background, I'm a pretty young guy, so I'll just start at the beginning because my, overall history is rather short.
Sure.
But so I graduated from the University of Georgia as a pre-med major. I had kind of an entrepreneurial DNA simply because when I was in my neighborhood when I grew up as a kid, I actually created this menu where I would sell chicken sandwiches to the parents that didn't make lunches for their kids. We didn't make
Oh,
much
wow.
money in the process, but my mom helped me distribute menus to the neighborhood. And then it was one sandwich. It was a Cajun chicken sandwich, and it was like wrapped and ready for people to go. Right. So I kind of was
Cool.
always with that mentality of saying like, let me try to help add value. So wherever I saw a problem, I was like, maybe I can help fix it. And I'm not allergic to money. So if there was a way to make money in the process, of course, that was also valuable. I
Yep.
think actually, and because I graduated pre-med, which is sort of like if you grew up with parents that are Middle Eastern, they're going to want you to kind of graduate pre-med. And that's me
Yep.
self-deprecating on my own culture, right? So that can't be considered discriminatory if it's self-discriminatory. Right?
No, Zane, well, I'll share with you. My wife is born in Australia, but of Indian descent, and so I've got, the running joke in our family is all Indians. They want you to marry a lawyer, a doctor, or an engineer. Like it's maybe if you're a banker, they'll let you in. But so I understand the mentality.
Yeah, so that's so true. And I mean, for me, it was I graduated pre-med. I worked at a hospital. It was already too late for me to kind of change majors. But when I was working at the hospital, people would come in and I'd kind of see like, okay, some people were diagnosed where we couldn't do anything about it. And I was so, extroverted that the energy that would kind of get sucked out of me, knowing that, there's nothing we can do, that I would be thinking about that person. And I'd spend an hour and a half working in the hospital, but it felt like I spent 2 days there. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
not going to work for me. Right. So, and interestingly enough, my brother was in the property insurance business, and he was like, why don't you look into the health insurance like carriers? And
Yeah.
I'm like, why would I do that? And he was like, well, you're pre-med, so maybe there's some correlation there. And he was like, and it in the insurance world, it's pretty entrepreneurial, which sounded really boring to me, right? Health insurance. I'm like, that doesn't sound attractive at all.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, I went and Cigna was recruiting out of my career fair at UGA. So I was like, I'll go talk to them. And they're the only firm I talked to. I was in a fraternity at UGA, and so that's one of the things where what I realized was you meet people, and when you meet people, you kind of join a fraternity. And I led our recruitment, and if you joined our fraternity, it was because just like you join a leader or you join a manager or you leave a manager, it's sort of the same way, right? So it was very sales oriented. With Cigna, everyone I met were the kind of people that I felt comfortable. It was kind of like almost an extension of my fraternity to the real world. That's kind of at least
Yeah.
how it felt. So I continued through the interview process, joined Cigna, and then they took 22 people from around the country and they brought them to their headquarters in Connecticut, where we spent 16 weeks. Ironically, that's where I met my wife. She's from Texas,
Cool.
and so it was straight out of college. But at the end of that, they do a fantasy draft ranking, right? So all these VPs come in. Fortunately, I was ranked number one, and so what that meant was they said, "Okay, now there's all these places in the country you can go. Where do you want to go?" And I was
Yep.
like, I want to go wherever there is the most opportunity. And they said, well, South Florida has the most opportunity, but that's because we have very low market share and it's really hard. The concept is you work through insurance brokers, and you're trying to teach insurance brokers the value of Cigna. And I was like, all right, I'm never one to be afraid of a challenge. So I'm happy to take on South Florida, and South Florida sounds like an awesome place to live. So I
Yep.
moved from Georgia to South Florida. Um, Very quickly, I was able to pick up Cigna. It was really, just working with brokers. So it wasn't cold calling as much as it was calling people with a brand that they knew, right? And I was calling
Yep.
brokers who they kind of have no choice but to at least get your quote. They don't have to write any business with you. That's where the
Yep.
relationship development comes in. But very, very quickly on, I mean, by my first year, I was rookie of the year. What I learned though at Cigna was that in America, the cost of healthcare, it's not only rising at an unsustainable pace, but America's got a broken healthcare system. Now, let me
Yeah.
explain that. When I say it's broken, if you were to talk to anyone in the healthcare system, they'd say it works perfectly. Shareholders would say it works perfectly, right? Because it works for the benefit of shareholders, but a consumer
Yep.
and now the physicians, that's where it does not work. I mean, if you look at an employer, the fact is employees today, if they're looking at a normal wage increase of 3%, well, health insurance is eating up that entire 3%. And so
Yeah.
we've seen health insurance spiral out of control in terms of the cost per employee per year. And
Yeah.
the share prices of the sort of the Blues, United, Cigna, and I kind of show you that. So what I learned is that here's the concept of how an insurance broker makes their living, right? So they go to companies and they tell the company, I'm going to do what's in your best interest. Hire me so I can negotiate down your rates. So now, as the CEO of any company, let's think about this. I'm about to hire somebody if I'm hiring this broker. Now, who do they work for? Well, I'm not paying them. I don't even know how they get paid if I'm the CEO of any company. So what they get paid on is three things. They get a percentage of the premium of the
Yep.
insurance carrier, right? They get bonuses for the profitability to the insurance carrier and bonuses for the retention to the insurance carrier. How do those help me as a business owner? All three of those actually go against my best interest. So
Yeah.
as I'm working at Cigna, one of the early renewals I got was a 3% renewal. I called the broker and told him, and he said, well, I already talked to the CEO and HR and they're expecting a 17. Can you increase it to a 17%? I was like, I don't know. I was relatively new. I said, let me call my boss. Call my boss. She said, great. That's a great broker partner. Absolutely. And so as I go through the motions and I'm sitting there listening to how these brokers are explaining what they do to the employer and saying, we have such a great relationship with Cigna, we might be able to get this to a 12% increase. And the employer at this point is saying, we're going to have to lay off 20, 30 people. It's about a 350 employee company in order to make that increase work. And as I'm sitting there listening and I've got underwriting training, I know how the rates are developed and I know that that's not the real solution. So I was like,
Yep.
wait, this is a serious problem. And the more people I talked to, I was like, there's got to be a firm out there that sits on the same side of the table as the CEO. But there wasn't. So that
Wow.
was what spawned me building. And I didn't call it a brokerage, but it was a brokerage. I called it National Insurance Consulting Group because I wanted to make sure we were a consulting firm. And our model was super simple. It was, how are we different? Pay for performance. We get paid by the client. And so we are, we didn't have any of the restrictions of being contingent or reliant on the industry norms. And so
Yeah.
literally, I mean, America has taught itself that this broken model is the right way to go. But just simply through education, we were able to scale. It was not easy. The first 83 meetings were rejections. 15 months
Yeah.
in, no revenue, right? So I was number 2 in the country at Cigna, and I'm thinking, this is going to be so easy because I had helped brokers win so many big accounts. What I
Yeah.
underestimated was how hard it was for them to build that relationship with the CEO that they got me to come present to. Right. And
Yes.
so what I ended up realizing in the process, because again, I'm 27 at this time, and I'm going to companies that are spending 10 million bucks on health insurance, and I'm saying, Fire your
Wow.
publicly traded company with a team of 40, or well, more like a team of 4,000, but 40 assigned to your company, and hire
Yeah.
me and my executive assistant because
Yep.
I can better manage that $10 million spend. Right. And
Yeah.
so that what that didn't go over so well. What I realized was, you know what? All I need to do though was figure out who had the relationships already, show them what I could do. And so I actually got in contact with the chief revenue officer of the New York Times.
Wow.
And fortunately, he was interested in what I had to say. He flew down from New York to South Florida, and then he watched me deliver the type of results where we saved a staffing company about $800,000. They had 400 employees. He saw that,
Wow.
and then he was like, so he was scheduled that night to go back. That was our first client, by the way. So he, on his first day meeting me, where I intentionally had him come down and meet with
Yeah.
the owner of this business, because I was like, if she sees him, it'll validate that, yes, it's just me and my executive assistant, well, and the chief
Yep.
revenue officer of the New York Times, right? And that's good enough. That
Yeah.
was good enough for me. And so she fired a publicly traded broker. She hired me. She knows she's my first client. And
Yeah.
then, I called her back that night and I said, hey, so his name was Guy Holiday, the chief revenue officer of the New York Times. And I was like, Guy isn't convinced. I told him not to leave tomorrow because he was going to go back to New Jersey. And I was like, I told him not to leave, but he's not convinced. Can you refer me to anyone else? And she set up 13 appointments for me. We closed 10 out of those 13. So
Wow.
he stayed down for 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, he said, you know what? I'm leaving the New York Times and I want to come join and help you run the company. And
Wow.
so he became my president. And that was for 12 months. All he did was walk into everyone he knew, which was just about everybody, and say,
Yeah.
I have this insurance savant. Like he's the biggest genius you got to meet, and he can actually seriously impact your bottom line. And he brought me into every company he knew, and we just closed deal
Wow.
after deal.
Wow, that's a fantastic story. Yeah, you remind me a little bit of Rod Drury from the guy who founded Zero accounting software, because his previous company had done a similar thing. Just sold to a couple of Fortune 500s and then sold to people who just could walk in the door to every other Fortune 500. It just, having that kind of leverage is just massive.
To me, there was no question. The preparation met the opportunity. That opportunity was the lucky conversation with him. Like
Yeah,
when he called and my executive assistant answered, and she was like, he says he's the chief revenue officer for the New York Times. I'm like, I don't know why he's calling, but I'm excited. Like this is the moment. And so
yeah,
to me,
yeah,
it ended up being something where, literally so after a year, he was like, I don't know anything about insurance, but I've introduced you to everybody. And I don't think I can add any more value to the company. By then we had quite a few staff, and he was
yeah,
like, I think you need to be able to fly your wings and kind of without me. And I was like, look,
yep,
you've been a part of our company. At least if you don't want to keep doing this, I want you in the family. So I actually partnered him with my mom. They run a real
yeah.
estate investment firm, and they've been running it, 50-50 partners since then. Um,
Cool.
and 3 years later, we were the 667th fastest privately held company in America on the Inc.
Yeah,
5000.
nice.
And that's when publicly traded companies were coming to buy my firm. That was when the first approach. So 5 years into forming the business, we're being sought out to get acquired. And at that time, I was having my first child. I wasn't thinking of it as being sold. I was thinking, like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to buy into a firm that has a lot more resources than we do. I learned my lesson that you really need a great advisory group to help you exit. And that's a plug for you, Simon, right? Because I learned a
Thank
lot
you.
of lessons on going through that process, on how critical it is to not only know why you're doing what you're doing, but to know what questions to ask, how businesses are valued. I mean, there's so many things that I learned.
Yeah,
It was an expensive education because it didn't go as well as it was supposed to, right? But at the end of the day, it was. I always view everything as, it's all an education. So I
yeah,
mean, I still went through. I was able to, while I was running that company, and before I'd sold it, I'd started a sort of an ancillary payroll company. I cross-sold that to 92% of our clients. And that was an excluded company. I was like, I'm not going to sell both companies at the same time. I actually just closed on the sale of that company to a Stone Point backed platform in August. So, 3 months ago.
Well done.
And so that whole experience of me joining what I'll call an acquirer that didn't pan out the way it was expected to, got me thinking about the fact that, there's a better way to acquire. And so over the last 2 years, what I was doing was I said, I'm going to take the time and I'm going to think about if I had done what I should have done, which was have the right advisors and have the end in mind, what would the ideal entrepreneurial model where you can grant autonomy to the entrepreneurs who have built successful businesses, but you can allow them to do partnerships. So it's really servant leadership in my mind. It's less about corporate, less about me. It's all a partner-driven model, and to say, okay, I can help what I'll call any size firm become better. So the emphasis is on two types of businesses: the independent agency that can either bring value to our partners, or the independent agency who we can bring enough value to. Those are the two types of firms we look for. But when I began this, it was, when you're really, really looking for deals, anybody looks good, right?
Yeah.
And so I began by calling and educating a couple of firms, and then I said, you know what, I'm not going to go after just any firm. I said, I'm going to find the best firm I can find in the country with the best entrepreneur, and I'm just going to focus on that entrepreneur. And once I close that entrepreneur, just like the New York Times sort of reference, then everyone else will want to join. And so that's what I did. I called them.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm cutting you off here. Yeah, no, I want to go back if I can a little bit.
Yeah,
because
absolutely. Sorry, I move quick sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm very keen to hear about what you're doing today, because I think it's how I see a lot of business owners as they go through the journey. They shift gear at some point and understand the power and the leverage of growth via acquisition, and how do you form those kind of strategic partnerships. So, but before you got there, you made a point on it, and thank you. I mean, you're referencing the value of having a team around you, people can help you on a process. But can you tell us what happened in that initial deal? What were some of the learnings? What happened that made you feel like that?
Yeah, so here's I'll back up and tell you the process. I did hire a banker. Bankers are different than advisors, right? So but this is what the banker model was. It was, okay, in our industry, it's a very liquid industry. So it's like, they were like, okay, we're going to introduce you. Like, who do you want to sell to? Public, private equity backed, giant. And I was like, private equity backed only. Because at least what I had learned was that, the second and third bite at the apple were opportunities if you rolled equity.
So just to explain that for people listening, because some people won't get that. So often when you're selling to a private equity group, they may not buy 100%. They may say to you, listen, but part of this is a bit of a risk mitigation strategy for private equity, because if they buy 80% of your company, you still own 20%. Well, it's still in your best interest to make sure that the transition goes well, that the private equity firm is set up properly, that you transfer everything you can. And of course, the carrot for you is that you get a second bite of the cherry, that perhaps when they exit, and I've even had guests on this show where the portion they were still holding on to in the end,
more than the whole. Yep.
Correct. They got more money for the last 20% than they did for the first 80%. So that's what you're describing there, Zain. Is that right? That you hung on to some shares?
Yeah, and I'm glad you backed up, because a lot, and it's always good to remind me that sometimes the audience, so as I went through this beginning process, I had understood not only what my margins and my EBITDA was, but my pro forma adjusted EBITDA. Meaning, I knew that if for the audience, if we look at the financials and say, let's back out all personal expenses, let's back out anything that's a different owner. If it's not me was going to run the business, what would the margins be then, right? What would the profit be then? And that's called the adjusted EBITDA.
Absolutely.
What a lot of people don't know until they go through that process with a banker is, so where's the biggest avenue you get is your salary reduction. Right. That's a huge area, especially for bankers. They want you to sort of take the minimal salary.
Yep.
And if you're the entrepreneur, you're thinking, I don't know what the future looks like here. So if I'm getting a multiple of, I'll just say eight times of my earnings, and if I'm making a $500,000 salary, but I could drop it to 100 grand, that's 400 times eight. That's 3.2 million. I'm going to take off the table, right?
Absolutely.
So am I willing to do that? Well, yeah, I'm going to be willing to do that because that's cash up front, right? That's minimal
Yeah.
risk
Yeah.
to me. But the
Yep.
reality is, like, if I'm that model tends to happen when you don't believe that there's a likelihood of long-term longevity there. And it wasn't that
Sure.
I didn't believe it. It was that I got introduced to 8 companies,
Yep.
8 1-hour management meetings. That's what they call them,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
So here's what happened in each one of those. Nobody asked me, why are you looking to sell? Right?
Wow.
Each of the buyers came in and they did a 1-hour pitch, and literally I had just 2 members of my management team. One was there for all of them, and a second was there for a couple, and literally we just sat there. And then at the very end, they're like, hey, great meeting you guys, because they had the sim, what the banker puts
Yeah.
together, like the pitch book the
Which,
banker puts together for the buyer.
yeah. So for those listening, a SIM is CIM, a confidential information memorandum. It's a detailed kind of booklet or prospectus almost that gets used to help sell your business. So yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the pre-work, right, is you go through all the financials. They sort of create the story in that sim. I mean, when I read the sim, I was like, man, this looks like a great business, right? Even though it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
my own
Yeah.
business, but because
Yep.
they do a good job with that, and
Yep.
articulating the value of why it would be valuable for a buyer. And so I went through it and I was reading through it, and I'm like, man, this is great. Awesome. Like, this is good work, right? And so I meet each one of the buyers and I'm thinking this will be a two-way conversation. This is supposed to be a really big decision. And most people in their lives, they don't get a chance to sell two companies, right? That it's usually
Yeah.
one, it happens once in their life. Um,
Absolutely.
and you don't have the luxury of making a mistake. Because if you
Yeah.
do, it's sort of depressing, and you don't have a lot of opportunities to make a turnaround.
Well, and it could cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. And so I can say mine cost me a lot of money. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened because I was young enough that I could look at the problem, and it's an industry problem, meaning the banker approach that I had, and I'm not saying the banker I had was not a good banker. I'm saying that it takes more than just a banker. It takes the time in advance to say, what am I trying to do? Why am I selling my company? Because one of the things I heard that got me to take even the interest was if you say no to an offer, so I'll just make it up. Let's say someone came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to offer you 15 million bucks for your business," and I say no,
Yep.
right? Then I'm saying I'd be willing to take $15 of my own money to buy my company at that moment. Because if
Yep.
I'm saying no,
Absolutely.
that's exactly what I'm doing, right?
Do you know, Zane? It's I had another guest on the show. In fact, I think we're both mutually connected with him on LinkedIn. It was Greg Alexander, but he, yeah, he saw,
I'm not just
yeah.
connected with him. He's actually he's been a close mentor of mine.
Oh, there you
So
go.
I know Greg very well, and man, his
Yeah,
advice has been
yeah.
phenomenal.
He's a guy who knows how to rock it, right? Like, I mean, he sold his
Absolutely
company
knows.
for 10 times EBITDA, 162 million bucks. It was an amazing transaction. When he came on the show, one of his little pieces of advice that I've been sharing liberally with everybody who'll
Yeah,
listen is that every business has two numbers: what it's worth to you and what it's worth to the market. And if at some point it's worth more to the market than it is to you, you should sell. Because at the end of the day, that dynamic can change overnight. And at
that's
the
key.
end, if it's worth more to the rest of the world, man, take the money. You can do other things with it. You can start another business. You can reinvest it. And in many cases, perhaps not even work at all if you don't want to. But there is a dynamic there, and that dynamic shifts all the time, but depending on what's going on in the broader market.
That is an unbelievably astute piece of advice. And I'm in a market where right now we are at the highest valuations that we've ever seen,
Yep.
which could literally shift in a moment's notice, right? So I think that's where the concept of that, it's so relevant because, like, uh, yeah, I'm now going to share that liberally with the whole world too.
Yeah, yeah, totally. If you're listening to this and you're a business owner, one of the big questions you should be asking yourself is, what is this business really worth to me? And that's a, by the way, is a deep personal question. It's not just about money because it factors in your life. It factors in all these important things about where you want to go and how you want to live and how you want to spend your time. So, if you're unsure about some of that and you're unsure about maybe about what it's worth to you or what it's worth to the market and what sort of process to go through, please feel free to reach out. I mean, you can go to Exit Advisory, you can speak to anyone you like. I mean, even if you just want to get on a call with someone and ask some questions, there's no, do that. It's sometimes you don't know what questions to ask of yourself when you're going through this process. So yeah.
To
Anyway,
that
thought I'd
point,
share
what
that.
you just described, so because I didn't have advisors and I went to a banker, the banker wanted to control the process. When I say
Yeah,
control the process, here's what I mean. I didn't get to talk openly about, what I wanted to do. It was very, I'm going to have 15 minutes, get these things done, move it along, wanted to move as fast as they could. And so all the things like that you would ask people to try to understand what they're looking for. Well, it's no different than what the insurance broker. What's the insurance broker gets paid based on a percentage of premium. The banker gets paid based on a percentage of a deal, right? So
yep.
do they really look for the best fit for you? I mean, you'd like to say they do, but their compensation would tell you otherwise.
Yeah, they're conflicted, right? I mean, and look, don't get me wrong. When we sell transactions, we sell businesses. Yes, there is always a success fee component to things,
Of
but
course.
one of the things I've always prided ourselves on is, we're not called business sales or us. We're called exit advisory, and exit means different things to different people. We've had people come to us wanting to sell or asking us to sell, and then we've, after talking to them, realized they didn't want to sell. They just didn't know how to
Well,
fix some of the
that's the
problems they were going through.
advisory part, because if you're
Yeah,
advising people to it, you're actually helping them figure out, here's the questions to think through. And that, I mean,
absolutely.
even the podcast you have like that, you wouldn't be having this if you weren't trying to share your knowledge with the world, right? I mean, and
Yeah,
that's
for
one of the
sure.
biggest things that people can pick up is there are podcasts, there's content, there's people's experiences, and you can see a lot farther when you stand on the shoulders of giants. Greg Alexander's a giant, right? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so whether it's, you don't even have to know people personally, but if you find people who have been very successful, try to find their podcasts and things like that, you can hear so many like golden nuggets you can pick up. But one of the things that I didn't do in the first business was I didn't begin with the end in mind. I didn't know what the business meant to me, but I knew it was, in my mind, something that I was going to be able to repeat if I wanted to.
Yeah.
I
Can,
that
can
I
I
had
ask a question?
confidence in.
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask a question? It might be a little bit left field and offbeat here,
You can
but
always ask a
it,
question.
yeah, I'm curious. Do you feel like, with your background, with your cultural background, and we touched on this earlier, but I was there an element of, if I sell this business and it is some sort of a successful transaction, do you feel like your background, your culture, your wanting to impress parents or something, or live up to some kind of expectation, did that stuff play into it for you?
And without question. I mean, so
Yeah.
like getting anything under an A was unacceptable in my household.
Yeah.
And whether it came to even in sports and basketball, like, yeah, it was. I remember like just the idea, because when my parents both came, they both worked really long hours, and they didn't have the what I'll call the luxury of, if they failed, having
Yeah.
someone there to swoop them up, right? So that's what they provided me. They provided me with the opportunity to take a risk where I knew
Yep.
if I did fail hypothetically, um, and I'm a hard worker, like
Yeah.
really hard
Oh,
worker,
clearly.
and resilience to me, like I have no call reluctance, I have no problem with rejection, and I don't care if the world does or doesn't like me. I just care that I know that I'm bringing value, right?
Yeah.
So like to me, I can easily cancel out the haters because they'll always be there, but I try to
Yeah.
surround myself with people that actually want to bring you up, and
Yeah.
who and I feel like I have a pretty good sense to be able to quickly judge whether or not they're authentic about it. And
Yep.
I didn't always have that, right? So I mean, I've gone through my share of partners and people that I brought in that I trusted and shouldn't have. But like
Yep.
now, I feel like that's become astute because I learned through some very expensive lessons. But there's no question that now, so there's two factors. One was the what I'll call the beginning of my career was all about showing my parents that what they raised someone that was bringing value and doing incredible things. After
Yeah.
that first deal, it shifted from what I'll call more focus on me to a complete focus on everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was like at a young, it wasn't age oriented, but it coincided right when I became a dad. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so now the model of what I'm doing today is I know how I can take a business, an entrepreneur in our industry, and triple the value of their business without them having to transform who they are. They can keep their brand name. They can keep everything that, because in our industry, there's 35 or more private equity backed consolidators.
Yep.
That's a lot of competition. That's very
Absolutely.
unique, right? And so obviously supply and demand drive valuations.
Yeah.
And when the supply side, when the demand side is all private equity, institutional capital, I mean, that's hence I meet 8 firms, 1 hour each, and I have 8 letters of intent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it wasn't hard to get deals. That's unique in our industry. And I
Yeah.
would say
Yeah.
most industries don't have that luxury because, if you find a lot of industries, it's like you're lucky if you can even have a business that's sellable.
Yep. Absolutely. So, the quality of your business, having enough ramp and runway time to prepare yourself for this kind of thing, understanding what the big picture is. I keep saying to people, look, we're all small boats in a very big ocean, right? Like you could be the best boat in the world, but if the big wave of the market is coming at you in the opposite direction, you are not going
You're
to
going
fight
down.
that.
Yep,
So,
that's right.
yeah, that's it. So, how do you position yourself to be in the best place and to have the most options? But for goodness sake, like if you see the wave coming and you see the timing is there, you got to know when to be able to pull the trigger, right?
Absolutely.
Uh,
And I think the more important part is you got to know that you've got the people, the team around you to be able to talk through it.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
Because like
That's
this
that's
concept of
awesome.
what we're doing now is all
Yeah,
I'm doing is I went to it's like, okay, so I didn't have the capital to go buy a bunch of firms.
yep.
I
So,
went
so
straight
just
to.
to, so sorry to cut across you, but just to loop people in so they can join the dots here. So you sold National Insurance Consulting Group. You've been through this amazing sort of life learning experience, and obviously had some financial reward along the way as well. But you've then gone and started another company, and you're kind of flipping the model. You've seen how the private equity guys have done it and done it well, and now you're deploying some of those methodologies yourself, right?
That's exactly right. So it wasn't my intent. My intent was to join the buyer, because they
Yep.
brought me on, and then I was to take a leadership role. I rolled a large amount of the deal purchase price into stock, um,
Yep.
and I guess 13 months in, I'll suffice it to say we parted ways.
Can I ask quickly on that? That company that you took the shares in as part of your payment or consideration, were they a listed company or privately held?
Privately held,
Yeah,
private
because you
equity
said private
backed.
equity, right? So yeah, so and look, for those listening, like often the exit strategy for private equity is often to either list it or then do an even bigger strategic industry play to somebody who's bigger than they are. But it just touches on your comment before about having an end game in mind because you've sold, but if it's not listed, selling those shares can be hard, right?
It's virtually impossible.
Yeah,
You can't do
yeah,
it based on when you want to do it. All right. It's
yeah,
subject to what I'll call private equity's life cycle, which is usually 5 to 7 year investments. And
yeah,
so questions that like if you're going to sell to a private equity buyer that I learned after the fact were, okay, where are you in with your current financial sponsor, i.e. the current private equity firm that's backing the buyer? Where is that? How long, when did they first invest in you? Right. And how are you performing?
yeah,
And what is called a multiple on invested capital. I mean, these are questions that you want to ask because it helps you understand when liquidity might come. And I say
Yeah.
might because there's no guarantees, right? But the concept of, and then, understanding, okay, what's their, what I call, what is your investment thesis? I want to know what do they believe they can accomplish and why?
Yeah.
I didn't ask any of those questions the first time around.
Yeah. And look, and this is the thing. I mean, you don't know, right? And it sounds like the investment banker you had was looking at getting the deal done. He saw that as his job, is just get the transaction done.
That's
But
right.
it's funny, isn't it? Until sometimes you've walked a path, you don't know necessarily. Well, once again, what questions to ask or what's important to you until you've come out the other side.
Yeah, I feel like in general in life, right? We
Yeah.
don't know what we don't know.
Totally.
Period. So the best thing we can do is try to find people who would theoretically know and try to ask, right? And then if there's people who are aware, then the best money you can spend, especially as an entrepreneur, is on the advice that you can get when there's no conflict of interest on that advice.
Yeah, for sure.
And then oftentimes what you can find is at the end of the day, when people are consulting today, I still hired a banker on what I did now. I
Of
hired a
course. Yeah.
banker. The only difference was on this one, it was, saying, hey, are you interested in rolling your fee into equity? Because I'm now not trying to use capital. I'm trying to
Yep.
use what I'll call the private equity type model,
Yeah.
and what do I mean by that? And I'll simplify it drastically. It's all private equity is doing when they're buying your business is they're using your value of your business. They have relationships with Wall Street, and they take debt out to buy your company. So they're using your company to buy your company.
Yep.
And so as I just think about what I just said, if I'm an entrepreneur and it's the first time I'm hearing that, I'm like, what? That doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
totally.
Well, it's because they have these predetermined relationships. They're not short, right? They've established a long-term relationship. You're not the only one they're doing it with. They likely have multiple other investments. And so the banks, which are not like Bank of America, I mean, these are institutional financing firms, are
Yep.
comfortable lending to them, knowing that they're going to go through the due diligence, meaning they're going to look at what your actual earnings are, and then they'll let them borrow. It could be between 5 to 7 times the earnings, which, if you're above that, you might be looking at a little too much debt.
Yep.
But if that's what allows the returns to be so meaningful, because all they have to do is outperform the cost of capital, which has recently gone up drastically. But
Indeed.
3 years ago was zero. It was almost nothing.
12 months ago, it was zero,
12 months
basically.
ago,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I hear you. It's crazy, isn't it? And also, I think, too, understanding if you're a business owner selling to private equity, I mean, if you do sell for 5, 6, 7 times your EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA, certainly the exit strategy for these guys is, well, first of all, thing I'll say is be a little bit mindful in terms of what fees they take along the way of the journey, particularly if you're staying in the game.
Yes.
But of course, when they go to exit, they're hoping to sell the thing for 12 times or list it on the stock exchange for 20 times or, so that they will make their money. Trust me.
Yeah, I mean, so I call it riding the backs of the smartest investors in the world, right?
Absolutely.
So as long as you make sure that that's in fact what they are. And how do you do
Yeah.
that? It's just by asking simple questions like, what is your, how do you compare to the benchmark,
Yep.
in terms of your
Yeah.
returns? But you got to ask the questions like that people are uncomfortable because they're thinking, I've got a
Yeah.
buyer. I'm excited. Someone wants to buy my company. And so they
Yeah.
don't want to ask what they perceive as the wrong question. And
Yeah.
that's the area where I think having an advisor to help in that process, because if,
Yeah.
even if I went back to my first time, knowing what I know now, well, now I could advise myself, right? But
Yeah. Of course. Of
I
course.
learned through the value, or the financial value lost for that education,
Yeah.
or what I'll call spent for that education, was a
Yeah. For
lot,
sure.
right? I spent a lot of that. Was by far way more expensive than any college will ever
Yeah.
cost anyone.
I'll share a tip with anybody listening, that's interested. But I've done enough deals out there and been involved enough things with my own money, with supporting clients. And we have a bit of a rule internally here is that, once transactions get over a certain size, we insist that nobody goes to meetings with other parties on their own. And the reason for that is that every single person on our team is experienced. Every single person on our team is able to actually handle a meeting, ask questions, follow a process, all that stuff. But what you're not seeing is that when you're sitting across and there's 3 or 4 other people sitting on the other side of the table, you're having a conversation. When a question gets asked, sometimes it's not what they say, it's how they say it.
That's
and
right.
I always find that my colleague will be looking on the room, looking at the faces of the other people not talking, right? Their perception of what the question was and what the answer was will be different to yours. They take away completely different things. They see different things. And the ability to kind of walk out of that meeting and then kind of debrief and go, oh, wow, you saw that? You thought that? I was thinking this. Like that sort of back and forth is invaluable.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things people tend to do when they walk into these meetings is they think, I'm just going to be me and not role
Yeah.
play. So if there's one piece of advice I'd give to anybody, it's role play, because when you're there, I mean, even in this podcast right now, I'm trying to listen directly to you, right? I
Yeah.
have no idea when the audience is watching this, how my body language, because all I'm trying to do is pay attention to our conversation and be present. Somebody needs to be there with me if I'm actually not doing this, but if I'm selling a company, right? I need
Yeah.
people there with me that are able to watch the body language of all the participants, that are able to
Definitely.
debrief after, and then role playing before, just so, because here's what people don't want, right? You don't want to buy a business where the entrepreneur doesn't have an intentional approach to whatever they're going to do.
Yeah.
When they're unclear, the one of the terms that I don't remember who said it, but somebody, it wasn't me. I have no, and I'm always very transparent on the fact that everything I do and learn is from somebody else. I never create the wheel. I never create the
Yep.
quote, right? But the quote was, how you do one thing is indicative of how you will do everything.
Yep. Absolutely.
I firmly believe that that's true, and how you show yourself is going to be the assumption of how the buyer will look at you. So,
Yeah.
do your research on who you're meeting. Try to figure out
Yeah.
what they're probably looking for, because I assume, unlike my experience, most people will get asked, why are
Yep.
they trying to sell their firm?
Yeah. Do you know, if I can share a small little analogy here too, because I love that expression. I've used that many times myself. I need to look up who coined the phrase because like you, I can't remember who it was. But, how you do one thing is how you do everything, because and I say to our clients sometimes, the whole point of being ready to go into these discussions and this kind of, like a due diligence. And I keep saying to them, like, how would you feel if you were going to buy a company and you ask them for a provisional set of financials because we're halfway through the year and they take 2 weeks to get them back to you? Like,
Yeah.
this is an easy document. You should be able to press a button and have that instantly. And you're scrambling around trying to find something so basic. Like,
Yeah,
as a buyer,
that's the scoreboard. Those financial,
yeah,
meaning if you can't produce that, means you don't even know what your score is. Are
yeah,
you winning or losing this year? Right? And
totally, bro.
if you're the CEO and you don't know your numbers and you're not closing on month's end and you're not able to kind of give that information rapidly, it's like,
Yeah,
where's your time and attention? Because it's just a matter of luck between whether you got to where you got, and
yeah,
nothing
totally
can be
right.
about luck, right? Everything has to be about the
Intentional.
intentional, and the normal entrepreneurial model needs that other operator, right? Because entrepreneurs tend to chase the next shiny object. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm guilty of this myself, and even
same
now,
here. Yep.
and I've got partners today that are very strong at helping me not chase it. But I still, now that we're in the opposite side, where I'm the one, quote unquote, buying. I don't like to call it acquisitions. I call ours as partnerships. The reason I
Excellent.
call it
Yep.
is because we began this with, it ended up being 8 firms that were committed to rolling 100% equity, right? So no cash on the table.
Yep.
But
Gotcha.
what I explained to them, it took a while. It started with that one firm I was explaining earlier that was the best benefits consultant in the country that I
Yep.
found, and then called him and I was like, "Hey, would you have any interest?" And he said, "Hell no. I'm staying independent forever." And I'm like, "That was what I was hoping you'd say." And he was like, "Well, why would you hope I'd say that?" And I'm like, because then I know you're not going to talk to anybody else. And
Yeah.
once I explain to you what I'm going to bring to you, then all you have to do is keep doing what you're doing. And I'm either going to bring to you what I'm going to explain to you, and you'll say yes, or you'll go through it and you'll say it's not for you. But the reality is you can't grow on your own organically as fast as I can help you grow. And the
Yep.
value of your stock with me doing acquisitions and you keeping growing, and he's growing organically at almost a 40% clip. But
Nice.
that's nothing compared to a 300% clip, which is what inorganic can bring you. And
Yeah.
so all the private equity sort of playbook is what I began approaching it with. And then, once we brought together the firms, we were literally closing on our quality of earnings. So for the participants, that means we hired an outside firm in order to determine what each of these partners' actual profits were for each of the businesses.
Yep.
And each of the firms didn't know each other, because our whole model was you can completely have your autonomy. I started with every conversation with, what would you look for?
Yeah.
If you were looking to exit, but in a partner, because
Yeah.
with partnerships, you can do more, right? So I call it
Yeah. Yeah.
partnerships, which helps you diversify, and that diversification can help you win.
Well, I think it speaks a lot to your culture. And I think it speaks a lot to entrepreneurs went into business for themselves because they don't want to be told what to do by
That's
people.
right.
So, if you're not talking about partnership and collaboration and 1+1=3, you've lost your audience, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so our competitors buy the firms, right? And they immediately want you to become an employee. Now,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're an entrepreneur, enough cash will get you to temporarily be an employee. But when they take away your decision making authority, which is what your intuition feels good about, you're not going to last long there. I mean, it's really hard to say, okay, I'm gonna go from making my own decisions with accountability. I'm sure there's usually, with a more mature firm, there'll at least be some form of accountability, whether we call it governance or a board of advisors, or it could just be the entrepreneur, but he has a business partner, or the entrepreneur may not have any governance. I'm a big fan of governance, even if governance isn't formal, meaning it's not because someone else owns your company. I just simply think everybody should be accountable, because my own mistakes were that when I wasn't accountable to anyone, when I treated it like, oh, I'm the boss, everyone just should do what I say. That's usually when all the sort of surprises came up, because
Yeah.
I wasn't looking around the corner. I didn't have the right people around. Here, this was very different, because my approach was like, I'm not, this time it wasn't organic. It was, I'm going to go find the best entrepreneurs I can find, but I'm
Yep.
going to, and bring people together in a community.
Yeah.
And then by doing an equity swap, we get to leverage the value that a giant company would leverage. So all the private equity things that can help create value creation, i.e., increase the enterprise value. And
Yep.
then, so we were literally about to close on the merger of 8 firms. And when I say merger, no integration, no brand name changing, simply
Yep.
an equity swap, right? And then,
Can I ask a quick question on that though? And
yeah,
and this is fascinating stuff to me because I just I love hearing about different models and methods of engaging and growing. And when you've done this merger, this partnership, is as part of the overall leverage, are you coming in with additional, like, do you provide additional systems? Do you provide additional resources? Like, where is there a leverage point in this partnership beyond just a
beautiful
bigger
question.
enterprise value?
So
Yeah.
when it began day one, it was a core values approach of saying, I'm beginning this now. I had just sold my firm, right? So, but what I learned the process was, I want to bring a partner driven, where, so the first firm that I'm referencing that joined, it was I'm going to build the resources based on you. You tell me what you'd want, because that's what's missing from the market. It's typically right now the buyers are the people who say, I'm going to buy your business. You're going to be an employee at my company. You might own 20% in stock and the rest is cash. But
Yep.
like, you are an employee, make no mistake, right? And
Yeah.
that's what they want to make sure. It's more about
Yeah.
them. My model is, I don't care if you ever hear about the brand name that I represent, because I'm here to help all the other entrepreneurs that are going to be part of our community. And over time, because by sharing the same core values, the no a-hole rule, that's one of the
Yeah.
most critical ones. The idea
That's
that
massive.
the idea that collaboration is valuable, right? Which I don't know anyone who would say it's not valuable. But and then the concept of, if you don't know what you don't know, which is that most of the firms I call are they're growing very rapidly, and they're younger firms. And
Yes.
I say, why are they younger firms? Because the average firm that is in the insurance industry is owned by someone that is 60 plus. So, what ends up happening if you buy that firm is all the relationship capital is with someone who could retire in the next 3 years and doesn't have a
Yep.
succession plan. Right. So I wanted to go after some younger firms to say, okay,
Yep.
let's build this for a 20-year horizon. We don't
Yep.
have to hit it overnight, but it was the goal at the beginning was to go to private equity and get them to back me at the beginning. And they all said, absolutely not. Right. They said, you got to come to the table with at least 5 million of EBITDA. It's based, and I'm like, well, how would I do that? And thankfully that was, calling on people that became advisors and asked them, how could I set this up? And they kind of guided me through it. Now,
Yep.
was it easy? No, but if someone's thinking about doing a roll up in their industry and they're trying to figure out the same thing, I'm happy to advise people on that specific aspect. Everything else
Yes.
you should be the advisor on, not me.
Yep.
But as it relates to that, I mean, I think what I ended up learning is right before we merged, we did get the private equity firm to come in and say, you've organized all these deals. They're all exclusive LOIs that have been signed. Valuations have all been set. Instead of you going through the formality of merging, why don't we come in and be your capital partner, and we'll facilitate this merger? And so that's where we're in the middle. Right now, we signed that about a month and a half ago. Everyone's qualities of earnings are done.
Yep.
And by, right now it's set that by the end of Q4, we would have completed it. So it's a phased approach, because to close 8 deals at once is not literally possible. Right. So we're kind of
Yeah.
doing a
Yeah.
3, 2, 3, like 3 in November, 2 in early December, and 3 in mid to late December.
Oh wow, man, that's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot. So
Yeah.
like when we get off here, I'll be reading 2 purchase agreements, and every single line item
Yeah.
on there, so that
Yeah.
but the nice thing is I've got a working relationship with our capital partner to the
Yeah.
degree that we're talking for an hour and a half a day, and we have been for the last 4 months.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has been an amazing story. I could talk to you about this stuff all day, but I'm mindful how late it is for you, and you've got businesses to buy and run and kids to raise. So
Not buy, to partner with. I want to say to partner with, because
sorry, apologies.
that's okay.
Yes,
It's just I
yeah.
feel the lingo is important. But
Language is
the
very
concept,
important.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that was a slip of the tongue for me. So apologies, but it's
Well, it's a unique model, so not everybody
yeah.
else usually does approach it to buy. I'm here to partner.
Yeah, yeah. You know what it is? I think you said purchase agreement, so it was like my brain, just slipped
Fair
into
enough.
normal mode. But
enough.
no, I hear, man. I really enjoyed chatting. As I said, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's but I am very, very appreciative of your time. You do have a very different model to, I would say, every other guest I've had on this episode on this podcast, and that's certainly over 70 of them. So. I love what you're doing, and maybe there's a follow-up episode for us in 6-12 months time or something, where we can unpack
That'd
some
be
of this
great.
journey, because I just love what you're doing.
Closed, and by 2026 we'll have a $450 million enterprise value. By 2030 we'll be a $1 billion enterprise. Now,
Nice.
why do I say that? Because the more I say it publicly, that makes me publicly accountable to the whole world and everybody that watches. So I will make sure that happens. But I'm happy. I'm happy to come back anytime. This has been a very pleasant conversation.
Oh, look, I appreciate that. Are you happy if people want to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say if they're reaching out on partnerships, like meaning the unique model that I'm describing, and wanting to do it, absolutely. If they're in the insurance world, or payroll world, call me anyways, just because they may not realize there's value, but there's value. But if they're thinking about what they're, I'd say I would love to just tell the whole world that, hey, if they have questions, but I think that if they have questions, it's better to reach out to you. That's why I'm on this podcast, right? Because you can advise people as it relates to their deal. But if it's industry specific in my industry, I want to hear from them because I more than likely want to partner with them.
That's fantastic. Well, look, we're going to put up your LinkedIn profile. If there's any other sort of contact details you'd like to include, let us know. We'll put them in the show notes to make it easy for people, and they're not sort of scrambling for a pen if they're driving and whatnot. But
LinkedIn's
we'll
a great
put all
way
that
to
up.
reach me. Honestly, that's the best bet. I respond to that. Cool. And almost at least 3 to 4 times a day, I check that. So I think that, and then I'll give my email in case people do want it.
Yeah, sweet. All right, cool. Well, and as we always say on the show, people, if you're going to reach out to Zain, please put a little note in there. Don't just do some random connection. Give him a little note. Let him know you heard him on the podcast. At least he has some context as to where you're coming from. So, Zain, thank you once again, mate. I'm really appreciative of your time, and I look forward to part 2 of our journey together.
Me too, Simon. I appreciate it too.
Awesome. Thanks again for everyone for tuning into this episode. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I'm just loving this model, and I'm loving this idea of partnerships and collaboration over simple acquisition and gobbling up other people and companies. So if you want to know more, we've touched on so many issues here today. Please feel free to reach out to Exit Advisory Group at exitadvisory.com.au. We're very happy to answer your questions around this stuff, even if it's just a quick, virtual coffee and we can talk through some of the things you're thinking about. We're happy to help. So thanks for joining us, and hope to see you at the next episode.